Welcome to ZZ Stories.
Can we?
When CEO Alexander Hartwell's paralyzed twin daughters sat alone at their 7th birthday cake, crying instead of celebrating, a single father working as a hospital janitor made a choice that would transform 4 lives forever. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The soft sound of crying drifted down the sterile corridor of Maple Ridge Children's Hospital, room 314. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a scene that would break anyone's heart. 2 7-year-old girls sat in wheelchairs, positioned in front of a small table. 7 colorful candles flickered on top of chocolate frosting, casting dancing shadows on their tear-stained faces. But this wasn't the joyful birthday celebration it should have been.
"I don't want to blow out the candles," Sophia whispered to her twin sister, her voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. "Me neither," Grace replied, wiping her nose with the back of her small hand. "It doesn't feel like a birthday." The cake sat untouched between them, a perfect symbol of celebration that felt more like a cruel reminder of everything that had changed in their young lives. Just down the hall, Nathan Brooks was finishing his maintenance rounds, his 5-year-old son Connor sitting quietly in the family lounge, arranging his toy cars in perfect methodical rows. The boy's concentration was intense, each vehicle positioned with mathematical precision. Nathan had been dreading this moment all day. His regular childcare had fallen through, and bringing Connor to the hospital was always a gamble. The change in routine, the unfamiliar sounds, the sterile environment, any of these could trigger one of Connor's meltdowns. But today, something was different. Connor seemed almost fascinated by the hospital's rhythms, counting the elevator dings and studying the geometric patterns in the hallway tiles. The crying grew louder. Nathan paused, his maintenance cart squeaking to a stop. He'd worked at this hospital for 3 years, and he'd heard plenty of tears echoing through these halls. But something about this particular sound made his chest tighten.
"Dad," Connor appeared beside him, having abandoned his carefully arranged cars. "Why are those girls crying at their cake?" Nathan looked through the partially open door and felt his heart sink. The twins, he knew their story, as did most of the hospital staff. Sophia and Grace Hartwell, daughters of Alexander Hartwell, the CEO of one of the city's largest corporations. 8 months ago, a storm-weakened tree had crashed through their grandmother's roof in Colorado, changing their lives forever. Both girls were now paralyzed from the waist down, and today was their birthday, and they were completely alone. "They're sad, buddy," Nathan knelt down to Connor's level. "It's their birthday, but they don't have anyone to celebrate with them." Connor studied the scene with that intense focus that made him different from other children his age. His mind, wired uniquely by autism, processed the world in ways that often surprised adults with their clarity and directness. "That's not right," Connor said firmly. "Birthdays shouldn't be sad. Birthdays should have singing and friends." Nathan felt that familiar surge of pride mixed with amazement at his son's innate sense of justice. Despite Connor's struggles with social situations, he possessed an emotional intelligence that cut straight through to what mattered most. "You're absolutely right, Connor. Birthdays shouldn't be sad."
The decision formed in Nathan's mind before he could second-guess himself. He'd spent the last 4 years learning to navigate Connor's world, celebrating every small breakthrough, understanding that sometimes the most profound connections happen in the most unexpected moments. Without hesitation, Nathan knocked gently on the doorframe. Both twins looked up, startled. Their eyes were red from crying, their small faces edged with a sadness that no 7-year-old should carry. "Hi there," Nathan said with a warm smile, stepping into the room with Connor beside him. "I'm Nathan, and this is my son Connor. We couldn't help but notice it's your birthday." The girls exchanged uncertain glances. Strangers didn't usually just appear in their hospital room, especially not strangers wearing maintenance uniforms with a young boy in tow. "I'm Sophia," one of the twins said cautiously. "This is Grace. It's our birthday, but—" Her voice trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. "But it doesn't feel happy," Connor finished, his directness cutting straight to the heart of their pain. Grace nodded, fresh tears appearing in her eyes. Our daddy had to go to an important meeting. He said he'd be back soon, but that was a long time ago. The nurses brought us this cake, but we don't want to celebrate by ourselves. Nathan felt a flash of anger toward Alexander Hartwell, but he quickly pushed that aside. This wasn't about judgment. This was about two little girls who needed someone to care, someone to show up when showing up was all that mattered.
The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a single father who'd been abandoned by his wife, a man who worked as a janitor to support his special needs son, and he was the one who had time to sit with these girls while their millionaire father was in meetings. But that was a story for later. Right now, there were birthday candles waiting to be blown out. Well, Nathan said, pulling 2 chairs over to their table, what if Connor and I joined you? Would that make it feel more like a real birthday party? Hope flickered in Sophia's eyes like the candles on their cake. Grace looked skeptical, her 7-year-old mind trying to process why strangers would want to celebrate with them. But you don't even know us, Grace said, voicing the question that hung in the air. Connor, in his wonderfully straightforward way, walked directly to Grace's wheelchair. His usual discomfort with new people seemed to evaporate in the face of their obvious need. I don't know lots of people, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends. My dad says birthdays are special no matter what, and everyone deserves to feel special on their birthday. The simplicity and sincerity of Connor's words seems to break through the girl's sadness like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. Sophia actually smiled for the first time that day, a small, tentative smile, but genuine. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. You can join our party. What happened next would become one of those moments that splits time into before and after. A moment so pure and unexpected that it would reshape 4 lives forever. Connor, despite his usual anxiety around new situations and changes to his routine, took charge of the celebration with surprising confidence. His mind, which often felt overwhelmed by social complexities, seemed to understand exactly what these girls needed. First, we need proper birthday music, he announced with the authority of someone who had clearly given this considerable thought. Dad, can you sing the birthday song? You know all the words. Nathan laughed, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. The absurdity of the moment wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a hospital maintenance worker, about to sing happy birthday to the daughters of one of the city's most powerful men. But sometimes, absurdity was exactly what the world needed. I think I can manage that, he said. As Nathan's warm baritone filled the sterile hospital room with the familiar melody, Connor joined in with his sweet, slightly off-key voice. The sound was imperfect and beautiful, like most of life's best moments. The twins, initially shy, began giggling at Connor's enthusiastic performance. Soon, they were singing along, their voices mixing with Nathan and Connor's in a harmony that had nothing to do with musical perfection and everything to do with human connection. The sound of their laughter was like medicine, healing something that had been broken not just in the girls, but in Nathan and Connor as well. For the first time in months, the hospital room felt alive with joy instead of heavy with grief. Now we need birthday wishes, Connor declared, his systematic mind moving through what he clearly considered the essential elements of any proper celebration. That's the most important part. You have to make a wish before you blow out the candles, and it has to be secret or it won't come true. Sophia and Grace exchanged one of those wordless twin communications, and for the first time that day, Nathan saw genuine excitement spark in their eyes. Can we wish for the same thing? Sophia asked, her voice filled with hope. Connor considered this question with the seriousness of a philosopher contemplating the universe. If you want to, he said finally. Sometimes shared wishes are the strongest kind. The twins closed their eyes tight, their small faces scrunched in concentration as they made their wishes. Nathan found himself wondering what 7-year-olds who had lost so much could still hope for. The thought made his chest ache with a mixture of sadness and admiration for their resilience. When they opened their eyes,
They looked at each other and nodded in unison. "Ready?" Grace asked her sister. "Ready," Sophia confirmed. Together, they leaned forward and blew out all 7 candles in one breath. The room plunged into a softer light, illuminated now only by the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Connor cheered and clapped as if he'd just witnessed the most spectacular fireworks display in history. Nathan found himself fighting back tears at the pure joy radiating from his son.
"Now we eat cake," Connor announced. "That's the rule. You can't have a birthday without eating cake." As Nathan cut slices of the chocolate cake, he marveled at how quickly the atmosphere in the room had transformed. 20 minutes ago, this had been a place of sorrow. Now it felt like any other birthday party, messy, joyful, and filled with the particular magic that happens when people choose to celebrate together. The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Connor, in his unique way, asked twins direct questions that most adults would dance around. Questions about their wheelchairs, their hospital stay, their lives before the accident. Rather than being offended by his curiosity, Sophia and Grace seemed relieved to talk openly about their situation with someone who wasn't walking on eggshells around them. "I used to dance," Sophia shared, a wistful smile crossing her face. "I was going to be in the Nutcracker this Christmas. I had practiced the Mouse King dance so many times." "I played soccer," Grace added, her eyes growing distant with memory. "I was really fast. Coach said I might make the travel team next year." Connor nodded thoughtfully, processing this information in his methodical way. Nathan held his breath, wondering how his son would respond to their losses. "My brain works differently than other kids' brains," Connor said with characteristic directness. "Sometimes that makes things hard, but my dad says different doesn't mean less special. Maybe your legs work differently now, but you're still the same Sophia and Grace inside."
The profound wisdom in Connor's innocent observation left the room quiet for a moment. Nathan watched as the twins seemed to absorb his son's words, something shifting in their expressions. Not acceptance, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a new way to see themselves. "Your little boy is very smart," Sophia told Nathan, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "He really is," Nathan agreed, ruffling Connor's hair. "He teaches me something new every day." It was then that Nathan began sharing small pieces of their own story, how Connor's autism made some things challenging, but also gave him unique insights into the world, how they'd learned to celebrate small victories and find joy in unexpected places. "My wife, Connor's mom, she left when he was little. She said she couldn't handle raising a child who was different. But Connor isn't broken. He's just Connor. And Connor is pretty amazing." The twins listened with the intensity that children bring to adult confessions, understanding perhaps more than Nathan realized about abandonment and loss. They were deep in conversation about Connor's favorite subjects in school. He was particularly fond of prime numbers and could recite the periodic table when the door burst open with the force of a hurricane. Alexander Hartwell stood in the doorway, his expensive suit slightly disheveled, his usually perfect hair mussed, his face flushed with anxiety and unmistakable guilt. His chest rose and fell as if he'd been running, and his eyes immediately went to his daughters, scanning them for signs of distress. "Girls, I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out of him in a rush. "The meeting ran over, and then there was traffic, and the merger documents needed my signature, and I—"
He stopped mid-sentence, his explanation dying on his lips as he took in the scene before him. His daughters weren't crying. They weren't sitting alone in their wheelchairs staring at an untouched cake. Instead, they were laughing, smiling, sharing chocolate cake and animated conversation with 2 complete strangers. A man in a maintenance uniform, and a young boy with frosting on his chin. The birthday he had nearly ruined through his absence had somehow become a real celebration after all. "Daddy!" both girls exclaimed simultaneously, their faces lighting up not with relief, but with genuine excitement. "This is Nathan and Connor. They came to our party."
Alexander's eyes met Nathan's across the room. In that moment, Nathan saw not the powerful CEO he'd glimpsed in hospital corridors, not the titan of industry whose name appeared on buildings around the city, but simply a father, drowning in guilt and regret. A man who was clearly struggling to balance the demands of his corporate empire with his daughter's needs. A man who had almost missed his children's 7th birthday because he thought providing for them was the same as being there for them. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion that he was clearly struggling to contain. I can't tell you what this means." Nathan stood up slowly, sensing that it was time for this family to be alone together. The birthday party had served its purpose. The girls were no longer crying, the candles had been blown out, wishes had been made. "Connor and I should probably head home," he said gently, already reaching for their jackets. "No!" both twins protested in unison, their voices carrying a desperation that made all 3 adults freeze. "Don't go yet," Sophia pleaded.
"We were just telling Connor about our old house," Grace explained to her father, her voice tumbling over each other in her eagerness. "The one with the big backyard where we used to play." Alexander's face clouded with pain at the mention of their former life, the sprawling colonial in the suburbs with the tire swing and the soccer goals, the house they'd had to sell because it wasn't accessible for wheelchairs. But he managed to smile for his daughters. "That was a beautiful house," he agreed, his voice carefully controlled. Connor, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult emotions swirling around him, looked directly at Alexander with his characteristic lack of filter. "Are you sad too?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander, a man accustomed to boardroom negotiations and high-stakes business deals, found himself completely disarmed by a 5-year-old's directness. He knelt down to Connor's eye level, clearly moved by the innocent question. "Sometimes I am sad, yes," he said softly. "It's hard when people you love are hurting and you can't fix it." Connor nodded with the gravity of someone much older. "My mom left because she was sad about me being different. My dad was sad too, but he didn't leave. He says families stick together even when things are hard." The room fell to complete silence. Nathan felt his cheeks burn at embarrassment at Connor's revelation. This wasn't how he'd planned to share their personal struggles with a stranger, especially not someone as prominent as Alexander Hartwell. But when he looked at Alexander, he saw only understanding and respect in the man's eyes, not judgment or pity. "Your dad sounds like a very wise man," Alexander said softly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he was learning this lesson himself.
That conversation in the hospital room became the foundation of something neither Nathan nor Alexander had expected. A friendship built on the shared challenges of single parenthood and the recognition that their children needed more than either of them could provide alone. Over the following weeks, Nathan found himself thinking often about the twins and their father. He would catch glimpses of Alexander in the hospital corridors during his maintenance rounds, always rushing, always on his phone, always carrying the weight of urgent business matters. But Nathan began to notice small changes. Alexander's visits seemed longer. He was present for more of the girls' physical therapy sessions. The constant phone calls during family time became less frequent. It was Connor who suggested they visit again. "The birthday girls need friends," he announced one afternoon as Nathan picked him up from school, his matter-of-fact tone suggesting this was an obvious solution to a clear problem. Friends visit each other. That's what friends do. Nathan couldn't argue with Connor's logic, and truthfully, he had been hoping for an excuse to check on Sophia and Grace. Their brief encounter had stayed with him, a reminder of how much difference one small act of kindness could make. When they arrived at room 314 the next day, they found the twins working with a physical therapist, learning to navigate their wheelchairs more independently. The frustration on their faces was evident. This was hard work, requiring them to rebuild basic skills they'd once taken for granted. But when they saw Nathan and Connor, their expressions transformed. "Nathan! Connor!" Sophia called out, her face lighting up with pure joy. From that day forward, their visits became a regular part of the week. Connor would bring his homework and sit at the girls' table, helping them with math problems while sharing stories about his school day and his latest fascinations with numbers and patterns. Nathan would find small maintenance tasks in their room that gave him reasons to linger, adjusting the height of their bedside table, checking the wheelchair accessibility of their bathroom, ensuring their window blinds operated smoothly. But mostly, he just listened and watched as 3 children formed an unlikely but powerful friendship. Slowly, Nathan began to notice changes in Alexander as well. The man started arriving at the hospital earlier in the day, staying later into the evening. More importantly, he began actually participating in his daughter's daily routines rather than simply checking in between business calls. Nathan would see him in the physical therapy room, cheering on the girl's small victories. He'd spot him in the hospital cafeteria, having lunch with Sophia and Grace instead of taking meetings. He watched Alexander learn to braid their hair when they complained that the nurses never got it quite right. One evening, as Nathan was preparing to leave after one of their visits, Alexander approached him in the hospital hallway. The usually confident executive looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Nathan, could I speak with you for a moment?" They walked to the family lounge, where Alexander sat heavily in one of the worn chairs. For a moment, he just stared at his hands, gathering his thoughts. "I owe you an apology," Alexander began, his voice lacking its usual corporate authority. "And more than that, I owe you a debt I can never repay." Nathan started to protest. No apology was necessary. Anyone would have done the same thing, but Alexander held up a hand to stop him. "Please, let me say this. I need to say this." Alexander took a deep breath, and Nathan could see him struggling to find words for emotions he wasn't accustomed to expressing. "When I walked into that room and saw you and Connor with my daughters, celebrating their birthday when I had failed them completely, I realized something that should have been obvious from the moment of their accident." His voice cracked slightly, the polished veneer of the successful businessman giving way to raw honesty. Nathan felt his own throat tighten with emotion as he listened to this confession. "Alexander, you're doing the best you can," Nathan said gently. "Being a parent is the hardest job in the world, and when your children are suffering, it becomes exponentially harder." "But that's just it," Alexander continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst. "I thought providing for them was enough. I convinced myself that keeping busy with work would somehow make their situation better, that if I could just close the right deals and generate enough income, I could buy my way out of this tragedy." He looked up at Nathan with eyes that held years of accumulated regret. "But your son, in his beautiful, honest way, showed me what I was missing. What they really needed wasn't another specialist or a bigger trust fund. They needed someone to sit with them, to see their joy, to share their moments, both the hard ones and the good ones." The 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts about fatherhood and the crushing weight of responsibility they carried for their children's happiness and well-being. "I've made a decision," Alexander said, finally, his voice carrying a resolve that Nathan recognized as the voice of a man who had chosen a new path forward. "My daughters need their father. Not my money or my business success or my networking connections. They need me to be present, to show up, to celebrate their birthdays and sit through their physical therapy sessions and learn how to braid their hair properly." Nathan nodded, understanding the magnitude of such a decision and respecting the courage it took to make it. "There's something else," Alexander said, and he could hear excitement creeping into his voice now. "I've been looking into adaptive sports programs for the girls. There's a dance studio about an hour away that offers classes specifically designed for children with mobility challenges. And there's a soccer league that's designed for wheelchair users." Tears sprang to Nathan's eyes as he thought about Sophia and Grace rediscovering their passions in new ways, learning that their dreams didn't have to die just because their circumstances had changed. "I want them to know that their dreams can evolve," Alexander said, his voice filled with hope that hadn't been there before. "They may not be able to dance or play soccer in the way they did before, but they can still dance. They can still play soccer, just differently." "They're lucky to have you as their father," Nathan said, and he meant it completely. "And you're an incredible father to Connor," Alexander replied without hesitation. The way you've raised him, the values you've instilled in him, the confidence you've given him to be exactly who he is, it's remarkable. I hope I can learn to parent my daughters with half the wisdom and love you show Connor every day." As the months passed, the friendship between the two families deepened in ways none of them could have anticipated. Connor, Sophia, and Grace became inseparable whenever they were together, with Connor teaching the twins about his special interests, prime numbers, chemical elements, the precise timing of traffic light patterns, while they shared their own knowledge and experiences with him. The twins began their adaptive dance and soccer programs, initially hesitant and self-conscious, but gradually embracing these new versions of their beloved activities. Connor attended every recital and game, cheering loudly and offering his honest, encouraging observations that somehow always managed to say exactly what they needed to hear. "You moved like music," he told Sophia after her first dance recital, and she cried happy tears at the simple perfection of his description. "You're faster in that chair than most kids are running," he told Grace after her first soccer game, and she beamed with pride at this matter-of-fact assessment of her skills. Alexander kept his word about stepping back from his company, and the change in his relationship with his daughters was nothing short of remarkable. One afternoon, nearly a year after that first birthday party, Nathan arrived at the hospital to find Alexander and the twins in the activity room, working on a jigsaw puzzle together. The sight stopped him in his tracks, not because it was unusual, but because it had become beautifully ordinary. This was their new normal. A successful businessman who had learned that success meant showing up. Two little girls who had learned that their worth wasn't defined by their physical abilities. A maintenance worker and his special needs son who had learned that family could expand beyond blood and genetics. "Nathan," Grace called out, noticing him in the doorway. "Come see our puzzle. It's a castle." As Nathan approached their table, he noticed something different about the twins. The sadness that had defined them for so many months had been replaced by something else. Not the absence of grief, because that would always be part of their story, but the presence of hope and joy, and the secure knowledge that they were loved and valued exactly as they were. They had learned to find happiness in their new reality while still honoring their grief for what they had lost. "We have news," Sophia announced excitedly, bouncing slightly in her wheelchair with barely contained enthusiasm. "Big news," added Grace, grinning widely. Alexander smiled at Nathan, his eyes bright with an excitement that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or merger negotiations. "We're going home next week," Alexander said, and Nathan could hear the joy and relief in his voice. Nathan's heart swelled with happiness for them, even as he realized how much he would miss these daily interactions that had become such an important part of his and Connor's routine. "That's wonderful news," he said, genuinely thrilled for the family, even as he felt the bittersweetness of this chapter ending. "And we have a surprise for you and Connor," Alexander added, his smile growing wider. "We've bought a house with a completely accessible design, ramps instead of steps, wide doorways, an adapted kitchen, roll-in showers, everything the girls will need to be independent." He paused, his excitement building. "But more importantly, it has a big backyard and a playroom where Connor can visit whenever he wants. Actually, where Connor and his dad can visit whenever they want." Connor, who had been quietly listening while organizing puzzle pieces by color, a task that gave him deep satisfaction, looked up with his serious expression. "Will we still be friends even if you don't live at the hospital anymore?" he asked, his question cutting straight to the heart of what mattered most to him.
Grace wheeled her chair over to Connor and took his hand in hers, a gesture that would have been impossible for her a year ago, when she was still struggling with the basics of wheelchair mobility. "We'll always be friends," she said firmly, her voice carrying the certainty that only children can bring to matters of loyalty and love. "You're the brother we never had." Sophia nodded in agreement, reaching over to ruffle Connor's hair in a gesture she'd learned from Nathan. "And Nathan is like our bonus dad," she said, her words bringing tears to Nathan's eyes. In caring for these two little girls, Nathan had found something he hadn't realized he was missing, a sense of extended family, of community, of belonging that stretched beyond just him and Connor against the world. Alexander clapped Nathan on the shoulder, a gesture that 6 months ago would have seemed impossible between a corporate CEO and a hospital maintenance worker. "What do you say we make this official?" Alexander asked, his voice warm with friendship and gratitude. "Would you and Connor like to come to their first real birthday party at home next month? Their 8th birthday? With proper decorations and party games? Connor asked hopefully, his mind already moving to the practical considerations of what constituted a truly complete birthday celebration. With everything a birthday party should have, Alexander promised solemnly, understanding that this was a commitment Connor would hold him to with absolute precision. As they prepared to leave that day, Nathan reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. A year ago, he'd been a single father struggling to balance work and raising Connor, feeling isolated and overwhelmed by the daily challenges of parenting a special needs child. Now he was part of something larger, an extended chosen family that had formed around the simple decision to show up for each other when showing up mattered most. Connor had gained 2 devoted friends who not only accepted his differences, but celebrated them, who understood that his unique way of seeing the world was a gift rather than a limitation.
The twins had rediscovered hope and joy while learning that their identity wasn't bound to their physical abilities, that they could still achieve their dreams, even if those dreams looked different than they had originally imagined. Alexander had learned that true success wasn't measured in quarterly profits or business achievements, but in the quiet moments of connection with his children, in being present for their struggles and triumphs, in showing up consistently with love and support. And Nathan had learned that family isn't always defined by blood or marriage or traditional structures, but sometimes by the choice to show up for each other, especially in life's most difficult and unexpected moments. The rain that had been falling earlier had stopped, and afternoon sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as they walked toward the exit together. Connor skipped ahead, already planning games and activities for the upcoming birthday party, his mind buzzing with possibilities and organizational details. Nathan and Alexander walked side by side, 2 fathers from completely different worlds who had found common ground in their love for their children and their commitment to doing better, to being better, to showing up more fully for the people who mattered most. Sometimes the most profound changes in life come not from grand gestures or dramatic life-altering decisions, but from the simple choice to sit down at a birthday cake and ask, "Can we join you?" Have you ever made a split-second decision that changed everything? Sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest miracles. Friends, if this story touched your heart, hit that like button and let me know in the comments about a time when someone showed up for you when you needed it most. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness creates miracles. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories that prove love and community can overcome any challenge life throws our way. Sometimes all it takes to change someone's world is showing up with cake and saying, "Happy birthday."